So I think we'll probably get started tonight because this is the core group that usually is here. So tonight is basically we're going to cover chapters 19 and 21. You'll notice that those chapters they're not done. So basically, Ryan has graciously said that he would take a stab at these topics.
Yep.
We'll kind of use Ryan's expertise here to kind of talk about some of these topics. And so I think it'll just be kind of just talking about these topics and kind of going over them. And I'm kind of interested to hear Ryan's perspective on it.
Good.
Once you get done kind of talking, Ryan, or once you get kind of going through your stuff, we'll kind of wrap up with what we'll do next week. And then we'll go from there. So Ryan, whenever you're ready.
Awesome, guys. I'm really looking forward to this chapter. Again, Colin is correct. If you haven't had an opportunity to attempt reading the chapter, it's a very short 5-minute read between both of them. There's not a lot of content that is currently listed. So my intent is kind of almost to take some liberty with the topics at hand, but yet still tie those into how it relates to our packaging, how it relates to websites, how it relates to CI/CD. I hope that I fulfill that mission for us, or I hope I fulfill that requirement. So I already see a grammatical error or a textual error when I compiled. What I put here is I said, this is chapter 19 and 21. Colin, I was firing off some text to you last night, trying to find whether or not I had committed vignettes, chapter 11, the old chapter 11 to the repository or not. But at any rate, I hard-coded this to literally read chapters 19 and 21. This is not currently in our packages repo. I would be more than willing and able to load it if required. So I put on here as a note to ourselves, fasten your seatbelt. This is going to be rocky. I'm doing that as my own internal humor, but there isn't a lot of content to cover in this subject. So I'm going to be sharing a lot of my experience, and I'll have a disclaimer here in a second. The learning objectives that I have listed is none, really. There isn't any. Chapter 19 is a minor skeleton at the moment. There's a couple of sentences and maybe some Mr. Hadley Wickham thought process into the future, but not really much. This allows us to talk about building websites, right? Chapter 21 is a continuous integration. It has a little bit more content. It has some more focus, but there wasn't really much substance to work from. So what I did is I put down how to build the CI/CD pipeline. Now, that I actually have a lot of content too, but it's not directly R related. And so therefore I do want to take some criticism from the group. Hey, that's great. You covered some good subjects, but it's not R related. So that doesn't really help me. Building a CI/CD pipeline, regardless of the language or the CI process you choose, it all kind of follows the same methodology. So even though I'm not directly tying this with R, it does have some relation to the subject matter that we have. I put in here, let's see, this is a combination between chapters 21 and chapter 19 together, where we are going to create a website using a CI/CD process. So I kind of tried to merge the two together and show that chapter 21 is how we're going to set up this constant integration pipeline. And then at the end of the day is chapter 19, the website itself. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But I hope you all find some humor in my subject. Going into the inspiration, I did take a very paragraph form, not so much bullet form. So do forgive me. There is a lot of details here, but I do want to highlight kind of the inspiration of where I'm coming from here. I'm a tech writer at heart. One of the many jobs that I fulfill is tech writing. And with that in mind, I will assure you that majority of the material that I produce is not using any Microsoft form of platform or any Microsoft tool. I don't mean that to judge anybody that is currently using Microsoft. I'm just saying that from a enterprise tech writing service, Microsoft Word or any form of documentation is usually not appropriate. So in that thought, some would consider my methods as being a modality conflict. And I coined that term. It's probably not appropriate, but modality implying that I'm choosing the vector of form in which I'm conveying information. And then the conflict being, I don't want to use Microsoft Word and I'll fight anybody about it. So that's kind of my joke there. The use case that I'm after is, but I only want to do it, but I only know how to do it in italics way. I only know how to do it in one form of documentation. And usually in that argument, I will always respond eventually with, yeah, but do you know you can use, letters B through Z and still achieve the same task? So that's what I'm going to hope to try and satisfy here. In approximately 2012, when I joined this particular business I represent, I was asked to develop e-learning content. Now, prior to this point, all of our media was authored, or our slide decks were authored in PowerPoint, in Microsoft PowerPoint. Now, again, I want to be forward and say that I don't have any judgment on those users that do develop in PowerPoint. I'm only saying I will willingly not choose to go that route, and I will argue with you on why it is I'm required to go down that route. At the time, all of our training media was in MS PowerPoint. Sure, there were tools to produce HTML presence, but not many that transcoded well. And one of my funniest stories in this PowerPoint to HTML or web format output was a paid service. You actually had to purchase this proprietary framework where all it did was take a snapshot of your PowerPoint slide and then make an image in a HTML like slide deck. It wasn't a good tool. And again, to each their own. I'm not wanting you to feel like I'm coming at you. No attack mode here. Okay. The quest for better presentation forms that span classroom delivery and learning management systems, LMSs, continued until about mid-2016. During this period is when I discovered Reveal.js. And if you're not aware, in RStudio, or I guess in the 2015, 2016 timeframe, Reveal.js was using a multitude of various HTML slide deck output forms. Now, I happened to stumble in and realize I was doing some Reveal.js on the outside while also doing grad studies with RStudio. And I'm like, that's weird. Our presentation, I wonder what that looks like. So I went ahead and quickly compiled something. I knew some I knew some format about Markdown. And I published the slide deck. I'm like, holy crap, that looks like Reveal.js. Hold on a second. So I go in and look at the underlying HTML, and sure enough, it's literally calling a Reveal.js library. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is like two self-fulfilling prophecies, right? I'm already doing Reveal by myself as a MS replacement, also using RStudio for my analytic grad degree. And here you go. They've got Reveal.js already built into the tool, and I wasn't aware of it. I said, so hold on, though. There are plenty of other HTML-friendly replacements for Microsoft PowerPoint, correct. But let me continue. My story doesn't end here. I stumbled into an article from Dennis Turin, and he's representing J-Driven. And I don't know if I didn't pull that over. Give me 1 second, team. Just at least. Yeah, I'll just open the article from here. So this particular individual it represents this J-Driven website. Whether or not this is free and open source media, I'm saying that it's on the web, so I'm going to talk about what this individual is giving us some instruction to do. I've tried doing this a couple of times and it hasn't been successful. So I've spent since last night and this afternoon trying to work through this particular format. Where did my slide deck go? Yeah, here we go. So with this article, it is specific to using a CI/CD process in GitLab. Now, I know that all of our learning community, John Harmon and associates, provide a GitHub service. Again, I'm not saying that GitHub is bad. I'm not saying that I'm unwilling to use GitHub. I would only preface with the comment that GitHub is now owned by Microsoft as of 2019. Okay, I'm a very anti-Microsofty person, so I only grudgingly use GitHub for the learning community. Otherwise, majority of my work is always saved and shared on GitLab instead. So GitLab CI, constant integration, and GitHub Actions are nearly identical to each other. Okay. Now I've found, and this is my personal input, I found that GitHub Actions is a little too elementary, or that it's kind of bloated, or it's difficult to navigate what it does. But again, that might be a human and machine, or a GUI interface that you find appealing. Again, to each their own. If you want to go that route, go for it. I enjoy more of the textual or command line side of management. So again, our differences are apparent. Before we begin, before I continue on into my dissertation, I want any of the team to know, and anybody watching this video into the future, I am not an expert. I am not an expert in this subject. I do have a undergrad in information systems management and a graduate degree with use of very heavily into Linux and a lot of this new RStudio framework that we're dealing with. So I'm saying that I'm a self-proclaimed expert, but I'm up for critique. I'm up for judgment, and anyone is welcome to fire at me. I'm not going to prevent or hide from those critiques. I'm good for it. I'm not employed in this role, so everything that I'm doing is based on my own personal experience and my own reading. This can and will easily start an argument with the way I'm going to express the next media. So again, if you are more familiar with this topic and you feel and you feel obligated to correct me, please reach out. I'm happy to have that conversation. I am always welcome to critique and learning, but please be nice. And that's part of our learning community. So I hope if you're in the R services, that probably you wouldn't come across as extremely rude. Before starting, let's get some terminology points clear. The acronym CI stands for constant integration. And what we're doing is anytime you commit to version control, you are going to trigger some activity that will do some action. That's the whole concept of this constant integration service. There's a multitude of different tools out there that can achieve this. I've got a few listed here. The next acronym I want to cover is called constant delivery. I always mess this one up because I use constant integration and constant development as the term, but it's actually delivery. So think of it as you're packaging your content and then uploading it to something else, right? In our packages concept, let's say that we have a build tool. So Rex, when you're developing your updating your current maintained package, when you upload it to your version control, you're going to trigger some kind of action that will execute all of your test sequence, and then possibly even do a compiling within that tool, and then maybe even literally shoot it over to CRAN, just hypothetically. Right? That's the whole pipeline type concept of this constant integration, constant development, or constant delivery. Do we have any questions from the team? Any comments yet? I hope I'm entertaining enough. Good. All right. In the past, there were various departments, divisions, or splits among software teams that achieve certain activities. So you have your software developers, and you have your test engineers, and you have your packaging and distribution staff. I don't know exactly what that title would be, but let's just say that once the testing is complete and it gets moved over to another group of individuals, they're the version control / management of distribution, right? So with this various split, also came the idea that you had a multitude of different tools that were being used by these various teams. Nobody had one collective whole to anything. We did the best, well, the teams did the best they could to stay within the boundaries and interlink with each other. But for the most part, there's an easy way, because you're all kind of in your own little fiefdoms, to break that whole working together cohesively. Whether it was related to software development, testing, or packaging and delivery, many of these groups used different tools and different workflows, all in an attempt to appear seamless. Okay. With the introduction of tools like Jenkins in 2008, Travis CI in 2011, or Ansible in 2012. So just as a side note, I didn't want to put too much history here, but one of the many software services that I find difficult to support is Oracle. Oracle got in Jenkins initially, or what it was Hudson, but it was initially open source. Oracle acquired that, branched it, and then there was an argument for quite some time of whether or not Jenkins was a branch of Hudson or Hudson was a branch of Jenkins. At any rate, just know that the developer initially released Jenkins in 2008 and still maintained it throughout that process. Travis CI is a German company, or a German I guess we can call integrations. It's a service for packaging and distributing software. Travis CI just recently in 2020, or maybe early 2021, late 2020, early 2021, just got in trouble because of their code base. GitHub was using Travis CI as their primary platform. That's ultimately where GitHub Actions came in. Travis CI kind of got removed and GitHub Actions was put in its place. But they had some security vulnerabilities. They were actually packaging secure credentials into, or making it publicly available. So they got kind of in trouble. And then Ansible is a derivative of Red Hat. Ansible is a workflow management platform. Other equivalents of Ansible, but I didn't mark them down, is like Puppet and Chef. If you wanted to go check those out, feel welcome to. Again, none of these are related directly to R as a service, but they are supportive of the CI concept. The real game changer was Docker. And if you haven't used Docker or you're not familiar with Docker, I would argue what rock you're currently living under, but I'm not saying that. I'm saying that with a smile on my face, candidly. Docker was released in 2013, and it revolutionized a lot of our agile workflow. It really changed the CI/CD process. You still had sysadmins, people that were managing infrastructure, but then it started to kind of migrate to more of like a DevOps sort of person instead, where you're overseeing quite a few of these. You have to be kind of a jack of all trades, but master of none concept. So in 2013, Docker provided a containerized workspace where a software team could create a work instruction in a YAML format, yet another markdown language or markup language. Think of baking a cake using a recipe and then outputting a container of only what you need to achieve that task, right? This whole concept removes the idea of configuration management, sort of. I want to be careful that I'm not taking away the subject. Aaron, you had made some statements about configuration management or just version control in general. Brendan, you had some really good feedback in that topic as well. The statement I say of sort of is because we can create a container that has specific instructions and we can replicate it as many times as we want. The change or the management of that version control is going to be inside the YAML file, right? So if we have to create another container or another image, we would specify, create another YAML file, create that next container, and then be able to replicate it that way too. So you do have to think about version control. It just makes it a little easier to manage. This spawned other topics like clustering, Agile, and DevOps in general. Let's save this for a later presentation though, because there's a lot of history that goes into that. Again, any comments with that history lesson so far? I'm not finished yet. I'll just open a rhetorical question. Have all of you, other 4 members, 5 members, have you used or witnessed Docker in service? Have you tried out Docker? I know Colin and I have talked about this a lot. Okay. If you haven't and you're watching this video, call me. I'll be more than happy to help you get into the Docker containerized world, even by extension into either a Mesos or a Kubernetes type clustering mindset. This is really, really awesome media. In truth, Docker can trace its roots back to the ch root and sch root. Now, these are special commands that were always in the Unix platform. I think it was 1989, 1988, 1989. I'll double check those dates. Don't feel that I know that it's before the 1990s, but it's not as early as the 80s, early 80s. A feature in Unix operating systems where your namespace can change globally. So what you do is, and I'm using some Ubuntu examples here, I could operate Ubuntu 2004, and I could evoke this chroot or sch root command, and literally make believe that I'm Ubuntu 8.04. I'm Ubuntu 14.04, whatever the numbering you want to choose. My point being is that SCH root and CH root actually modifies the global namespace of where things are pointing. So you can actually create an entire instance of Linux inside of Linux. It's not a virtual machine. Don't confuse virtual machines. It's actually a replication of your current environment. My analogy are the twin henchmen in the Matrix Reloaded. I am a huge Matrix fan, quite a big nerd. And so what I'm doing is referencing these two individuals that can ghost themselves, right? They can walk through walls. They just turn into like ephemeral nothingness, walk through the wall and then reappear. That's kind of what CH root and SCH root does. You know, the ability to ghost or becoming something other than what you were designed. Sorry, nerd reference. The concept behind CH root and SCH root is working with another root file system. So my root directory, my root file namespace is, 2004. And now all of a sudden I create a different pointer that says I'm Ubuntu 12.04. Okay. This is where I get into that argumentative form. Anybody feel welcome to jump in and correct me. Where am I going here? Let's see. Have a subsequent child believe you're in an alternate root system. Not a good explanation. Let's try again. You're operating on 2004 and you think it's 8.04. Once evoked, your compiler will operate in an 8.04 environment. This is really, really awesome. If you, Aaron and Brendan, with our environment or Python environment concepts, and we have this direct need to be a different operating system with SCH root and CH root, we could literally point and say, I'm now, some other Linux platform, and you can build it from there. Okay. It isn't a virtual machine. It's still the same operating system. We just renamed the namespace. So the containerized workspace has infiltrated nearly everything of today on internet technology. That's my own personal opinion. I don't have any basis to support that. I just have a good feeling that most people are building in this format. They are tiny. Containers are very tiny. They're very small. For example, a popular starting point is called Alpine Linux. It's one of the smallest of these containers or building blocks. Alpine Linux size is only 5 megabytes. You have an entire operating system within 5 megabytes of size. Currently, if you try to load Microsoft onto a machine, you're going to need at least a minimum of 20 gigs. Just to give you a comparison of the size differences there. Remembering the majority of bloat is stripped away. You don't need a desktop. You don't need majority of all the libraries, language libraries, et cetera, that are built into a more desktop environment. So with that stripped away, you're really just left with this very, very, very tiny service. And this lives at the very core of the containerization process. Okay, I'm done with my history lesson. Now we're going to get into some steps. By evoking the CI/CD pipeline in this GitLab environment, you're expressly combining the previous departmental separation of teams into this seamless workflow. And I made a reference here. My analogy here is the Industrial Revolution, but not nearly as efficient as the Ford assembly line. If anybody has done some research or some history and related to the Industrial Revolution, when Henry Ford came up with the assembly line, they were able to produce infinitely larger amounts of Model T vehicles at a very cheaper cost to commercial buyers. Okay, the concept will ultimately change the way you view sysadmin. And if you don't currently use this process, I highly recommend it. The topic of presentation for GitLab CI and GitHub Actions are nearly the same. So let's see how this works following our article. If you want, I do have this posted. So let's go ahead and just fire this off so people know the reference I'm making here. Check it out yourself. Back to our slide deck. We set up a new repo. We have to put a place with our instructions in this containerized service with the YAML file and all the instructions to create the workflow. We have to create our repo. And to do that, I have set that up in my own particular services. Let's go back to my main core here. Where's that at? Projects. There we go. I've got these top two that I'm working on. These are my two examples. So I created this almost at the same time as I was going through this building process. I started out with this rpkgs CI/CD example. That is where my quote unquote containerized workspace lives. We are going to be ingesting from this some slide example through the rpkgs CI/CD back into some slide examples for a web page, GitHub pages, excuse me, GitLab pages. GitHub has its own pages service as well. So I use some bash commands. I say make dir reveal.js. I use the touch point for creating a YAML file, .gitlab ci.yaml. This is important. You'll see that that's used. It's actually a trigger inside of your repo. And then also another special file called Docker file. And that's where we're going to put our YAML instructions for the container. You'll need to both access the reveal.js repo. This example that I'm creating, this HTML slide deck PowerPoint replacement, we're going to have to mirror or pull out some context from that repo. You can do this through your own file browser. You can clone the repo and then pass over the recursive files to the destinations needed, etc. So I'm sticking with this command line orientation. So these are bash commands, but I'm doing a copy recursively from my home directory reveal again. I had to screw this up. I've got a current reveal.js directory that I don't want to modify. So I created a reveal again. Inside reveal again is reveal.js with my distribution folder. So all the contents inside that got moved over to example reveal.js. Common question to the team, very, very quick response. Is the team used bash commands in the past or in a Linux environment? Colin, I know you're good with it, but some of our users are Windows oriented, so I don't want to leave them out. Okay. The way the copy command works is what directory is it currently in, and then where am I putting it? It's like copy and paste only through text. So the same thing happens with my plugin directory and also my index.html file. Okay. Once that's there, we need to recognize the use of Markdown in our HTML format. So therefore, we modify the index.html file with the current additional data markdown slides.md. Okay. It's a class example, but reveal.js as a service recognizes Markdown already. You just have to tell the system, I'm going to be feeding you Markdown content. Please compile from Markdown into HTML so that it works normally. This extra data markdown slides.markdown is required to trigger that. And then also we add some extra features saying the data separator is -- slide. If we want a basement effect, that would be the vertical, and then any separator would be, special notes, instructor notes would be a caret note and then colon, anything following that. Has the team used Reveal in the past or our presentation in the past? Okay, with everyone shaking their heads, please feel welcome and willing to reach out. I would be more than willing, I'd be more than happy to show you kind of the awesome sauce that's behind all of this. It's really neat. Brendan, Aaron, in that college type setting or PhD graduate studies type setting, this would be great to build presentation with. We now need to expressly call on the CA process within the GitLab environment. To achieve this, we modify the Docker file with 2 lines of text. We create a from Alpine latest. Again, earlier I made that reference to the Linux Alpine being the smallest. And then also we're adding another command to that same container that says, hey, when you get content, after you're finished, copy it to the reveal.js public folder. That's what actually creates your pages content, your index.html. Now the CI process, here's where we get cool. We update the GitLab CI YAML with the following content. So we are using the Docker latest, that's this up here. Services, And then I need to go look up what dind is. And if anybody knows off the top of their head, please feel welcome to jump in. It's a special command, but I'm not familiar with what it implies. The next one is in the build image, use your credentials from GitLab to log in and or process in a secure manner. The Docker build registry image and then the Docker push. Give me a second and I'll show you what I'm referring to here. So initially when I created the CI/CD, or sorry, the YAML file and I uploaded to the repo, you go over to this packages and registries and then container registry. When you open this, it will be empty. There's nothing there. And so after I had pushed to the repo, I thought it was just going to automatically recognize and execute that YAML file, and it didn't. So I'm like, crap, okay, now I got a bug. I got to figure out what I'm doing. So what I had to do was evoke or open that instruction for YAML. And then it gave me an option to, I think it was start pipeline or execute pipeline, something to that nature. And then that's what created this rpkgs CI/CD example. If we hover over this copy link, view source, what do I do? Copy. Now, this is a URL, and we use that to this repo later in the second repository. So it's a pointer to this particular workflow, this container, this Docker container. Okay, now we need to actually evoke it or create it. So you have a presentation at work or school or a book club. I'm joking. That's what I should have done here. And you need to build a slide deck. Let's make it happen. We create a second repo or a third or a fourth or a 10th or a 15th. It doesn't matter how many you have, just as long as you point that markdown file back to this particular workflow, it will generate and push back the media back to that other location. So we create a slides directory and then another GitLab CI YAML file. This is going to be our hook that sends the data to the other process. So I create a make directory slides, and then I create another CI YAML file. We're going to see what we populate here in a moment. Navigate to the slides directory and create a slides markdown file. Before I go on, show you what I'm doing here. Back to my repos. That's what created this some slide example. Okay. So initially starting out the instruction, this is the only point that I had. This is where I was putting my container, my image, all the instructions, etc. This is just here as a workhorse, right? We're going to pass information into this object, and then it'll pass from that object back out to the original repo. Okay. So I have markdown file. I command it to go to my pointer of where the Docker container is. I process, and I shoot it back out to that previous location that it originated from. I don't think I made that very clear here, so I just wanted to make sure I covered that. You go through your normal markdown format and authoring of slide deck example. Remember in a previous chapter, we covered markdown formats and vignettes. Colin, that was my reference to know whether or not I pushed that up to our book club repo. I don't think I did. At least I don't have evidence of it. What I'm populating our slides.md file with is this hello world. It's not completely identical, but it's close enough that I could probably get in trouble for plagiarism. I added additional media here to try and make it look like I'm separating, but really it's a copy and paste, and I'll admit that. Okay. Now that we've uploaded to our second repo and we've created this loop, I don't have that in here, do I? Give me 1 second. I don't have the instructions of what I put in the hook. No, I'm really sorry about that. That's weird. Okay, I'll own up to the fact that I must not have pasted it in. What you're seeing here is a YAML file. So in stages, we're referencing pages, the service that is a static website in your repo. We're accessing this registry, this Docker registry, container registry. And it's not at this location, but I'll show you where it is for me. It was that link I was copying and showing that we were going to reuse it. We use that for the pages. We move once we compile it, we ingest Markdown, we process it kind of like Pandoc and then push it back out in HTML. We move that to our public repo, and then from the slides, asterisk, whatever name we want it, over to public. And then the artifact paths is going to be public as well. Let me show you what I did. And I'm really sorry that I don't have that. Has the team, or is the team familiar with a text editor service called Atom? Atom is directly related to the GitHub ecosystem. If you don't use Atom, if you're not familiar with Atom, I could not encourage it more. This is an amazing tool if you need markup language and you don't want to do it in RStudio. So great platform. Has all of your Git hooks, so you can version control anything you need. Okay, doesn't matter. Where I was taking you is this point. So this is in my some slides example repo. And this is the GitLab CI YAML that I did not put in my slide deck. But what I'm doing is pointing at my own personal GitLab, okay? And it's located under rpkgs CI/CD example. The previous were the instructions I had before. Any questions so far? Any curiosities? Because I haven't quite satisfied this whole book club need of R packaging. It's great we're covering all this, but Metcalf, what are we doing here? What are you trying to reference? How are we making this book club oriented? I'll get there. Just give me one more second. Okay. Back to this presentation. Yep. All right, so ultimately, once you upload your content, it creates a Pages website, and it looks like this. So, hello world, this is your first slide. Note, you have to author it in Markdown format, right? The basement effect or the lower slide, you can't do that in PowerPoint. You have a nice vertical slide. Remember, Reveal allows you to have a basement effect. It uses this when I want to continue on a single subject. I use that from a heading level standpoint. If I'm stuck on a subject, heading level 2, heading level 3, and I want to continue the topic, but I run out of presentation space, we usually create a basement effect so that I can continue the slide without actually moving forward into the rest of the student guide or rest of the slide deck. That's my own use of that. Then the final slide, yeah, we have to stop sometimes. So there you go. That's the end of the slide. Okay. Last slide says happy slide making. Going back to our presentation, this is what it looks like. Okay. Markdown is heading level 1s. Okay. Anything that doesn't have any format on the front of it would be a P tag or a paragraph tag. Right. I did make another example, but for whatever reason, I can't seem to figure out the URL or the update URL to point at that new service. I'll show you what I did here. No, not that one. I go into my slide example and then I look at the pipeline itself. So what occurred, this is 2 hours ago when I built it originally, and then I created another slide deck. My commit message was new slide deck. It went through the sequence and now it's tagged as latest, but that's not what actually is presented. And I need to figure out where things are not working, where it's not connecting. I have my theories, but without actually testing it, I don't want to do it live. What I've learned so far, here's where I'm tying it back into our subject. To set up the pages, the place you publicly face must explicitly be made public. This is to protect yourself. By default, GitHub and GitLab and GitHub Actions, they usually try to keep things private. Right? You don't want to just willingly expose yourself to the world, so they will intentionally leave things as private. You have to go uncheck or remove that. I've used this same CI/CD process or something similar to it with a Jekyll service. I think of it as like microblogging, but I don't want to share that example. I haven't quite figured out what it's doing, so I don't want to look foolish. Yeah, don't ask me to explain it any further. How does any of this relate to RStudio packaging development and really anything? finally, I'm coming back to the reason. We've talked for 45 minutes. Now I'm going to try and put a shiny red bow on it. The two chapters we discussed, both website, chapter 19, and constant integration, chapter 21, they both served some level of purpose of why packaging is important. Now, chapter 19, I'm going to push it back over to more Shiny-oriented website development, more specifically engineering production grade Shiny apps, Mr. Colin Fay. In that case, the two chapters are under development. There's really not any content there. That's not me passing judgment. We just don't have any media yet. With respect to our learning community, John Harmon uses GitHub Actions. I do have some examples of that in a second. To control who and what can be committed to the learning community's repos. I've only viewed some of this while sharing screens with John. I'm not really the person to be an expert on it. Colin, feel welcome to jump in if you'd like to from a facilitator's point of view. I don't think we even as a facilitator, you're not really involved. John really takes care of a lot of this for us. For the purposes of topic, let me just switch over here real quick. So this is our R4DS book club, our packages. This happens to be a PR check, so a pull request check. So John has a particular container service that runs a process and then echoes back no build required, or maybe it updates the README file. I need to double check what he's doing here. What I found most important was the reference to Ubuntu latest. So my one statement earlier was Alpine latest. So here he's using Ubuntu specifically. Maybe there's a special flavor of that canonical format that he required. Okay, going back. Oh, slide deck. Referring to the engineering production grade Shiny apps, the author, Mr. Colin Fay, developer of the Golem package, if you haven't used Golem for package management. I'm citing paragraph 4.2.2 of that book. He uses within his second package, this hex make format where we create stickers. I want to try and make a funny joke here. Just give me 2 seconds of our packages. In chapter 19, as a placeholder, there's a statement that says include hexagon spec, and then mention how to get how to get as a sticker. So I smiled at that. We went through this topic in an earlier book club, so I wanted to make a reference to the HexMake package. Anyway, in HexMake, it uses a MongoDB database that is a Docker container. I didn't successfully get the HexMake package to operate, but I'm familiar with what they were doing with this container. So all of your credentials, your color codes, your text and images, et cetera, that's all saved in this containerized MongoDB workspace. Rex, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, we were making references to it was dependencies. One of the topics was dependencies. And I had mentioned to Colin I was going to possibly do this chapter 21, and we could put on these outside of RStudio features that would support and help make RStudio operate, or our package development operate. I would consider this MongoDB reference to be similar to that dependency. Okay, so that's my sticker reference, Colin, if you're check marking on how I'm tying this back together to the chapter, sir. Another example is the mastering Spark with R. This is not technically a container, but I wanted to reference it because it could be. You could have a Spark Docker service or some kind of a pipeline where you're using Spark as maybe a data aggregator. It's ingesting and then you're processing it with some other tool in the background, right? So I said it's not technically a Docker container, but it could be. It could be. There's tools for that out there. So takeaways: containerize is the future of servers. If you're not familiar with it now, I recommend that you get familiar with it into the future, especially as analytic and or package management. It does save you a lot of workload in creating this. CI/CD takes an agile and DevOps to another dimension by bringing multiple teams of software engineers together And now you can come back to the center again. We can all use the same tools because that container only has what we need and can be replicated and shared across all the various teams. Right? You can create infinite amounts of containers and tie them together of doing other things. Right? One critical note, Linux containers cannot run on a Windows server, and Windows containers cannot run on a Linux server. Because of that CH root or the containerized thought process, it's not a virtual machine. You're actually allocating resources of that machine, RAM, CPU, memory, etc., to another namespace. You're literally hypervising to another platform. So it's not a virtual machine. So Windows can only run on Windows, Linux can only run on Linux. My own opinion, stay with Linux. I'm not passing judgment to Windows. I'm just saying, if you've already made the jump into this Unix Linuxy format, go ahead and stick there. If you haven't been introduced, call me. I'll gladly indoctrinate you. GitHub Actions are nearly identical. Everything about GitLab CI process and GitLab Actions are nearly the same. In a lot of the critiques I read in researching this chapter, there's a strong opinion in the DevOps world of which tool to use. Again, going back to my argumentative disclaimer above, okay, I'm not here as an expert. I'm only trying to nudge you in one direction or the other. Okay. I tried to create a second slide deck, but it didn't seem to be accessible. And any thoughts from the team? Do you maybe have used this before, and why the namespace is not pointing at it? I don't know. I thought it would just update and replace the previous public directory, and it's not. I don't know. Maybe I got to purge it. No. Comments from the group. How am I on time? Oh yeah, I'm perfect. That's exactly where I wanted to be. So you got 10 minutes, Colin. Any questions from the group?
Yes, this is a good point. Thanks, Ryan, for having no direction from the chapter other than a few paragraphs. I think this was a good segue into talking about these topics. And so I guess this is a good opportunity to open up for any questions or comments that people would have for Ryan, or just anything regarding this topic in general. Again, like there's not a lot of content to really derive from, but I mean, has anybody ever been curious about this or anything that they want to chat about with this specific topic? A good question. Has anybody ever set up their own GitHub Actions with like an R package or anything before?
I've only used the ones that come through, like the use this package that set it up all for you. But yeah, I'd like to mess with making a package down site and then having that automatically, like deploy for every push. But I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I was thinking about. Oh, go ahead, Aaron. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to give another example. I think the Distill websites also, if you do like set up a blog or a website with Distill, that also I think does it like all for you. Like,
yeah, I've done that for a book down site actually as well. And that's super easy.
What was the name of that reference, Aaron? I'm sorry.
Distill. I can put it in the chat.
Now, I'm not, let me be careful here. I'm not saying that every single Docker container is available. I doubt it. I really, really, really doubt it that GitHub and GitLab would support the infinite world of Docker containerization. But if anybody's ever been to Docker registry, just go to it real quick. Docker Hub, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
This is really the world of Docker containerization. And I'll log in real quick. Where did Yep, super secret password, right? So once you're logged in, I've got a particular service that I'm trying to replicate, but it's not working. I'm trying to build and it's not working. But if you go to not repos, Explorer, you can show there's so many different tools out there. And one of the best starting points, at least Colin, in our experience with mShiny, is just web development. And there's so many different web services that you can begin with. I don't know, Brendan, in your research, you want to create a blog post. So you need a Docker containerized workspace with WordPress, and bam, it's up and running. And now it's hosted on some cloud storage platform, AWS, and now you can start writing until your heart's content. I use Brendan as an example. I went to your repo last night when I was doing my research. Aaron, I checked yours out as well, but Brendan has a lot of social media appearance within his repo, and I found that welcoming. I think that's a really good path to follow, especially as a prospering or person that will enter the workforce eventually within your field of study. Great to put your presence out there. At any rate, there's so many different services that are already compiled for you. I'm not saying that these are applications that you can use in your CI/CD workflow, at least not in your version control services. You could with AWS, you could with other Alpine, Travis CI, Jenkins, etc. You could have your own workflow kind of clustering in your own computer if you so choose. So.
I think the is it Rocker? I think is like the main community that's like doing the setting up the like Docker containers. Last I checked,
it could be an additional. Let's go look at it real quick.
I thought it was Rocker. I mean, if you go back to Docker, the Docker
Sure.
container going through the Explorer, yeah. Just type in Rocker. I think it will pop
up at the top.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I've explored, yeah, right there.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, that's the one that I've like played around with a little bit. I think I set one up one time to do like a Shiny server. I played around with it when I was learning how to do it. Yeah, I think Docker containers are interesting. I think they have their very specific uses. Well, yeah, I shouldn't say specific, but there's a certain point where you do need it. I think there's a certain point where you do definitely need it.
And I would almost say that there currently today, it's gotten easier. There's plenty of resources out there that manage some of the difficult parts of creating such a enterprise workplace or a networking, computer server network, etc. Environment. There is a point where it can become too complicated too. Like you're just willingly going a little too over the moon with containerized workspace that you have to just stop and think, man, maybe that's not the right path to go. Good example, Colin. I think I've made this reference before. Just because you can does not mean you should. There's got to be a point where you have to stop and think, is this really appropriate? Should I really go down this route? Is there a different tool that I could use that might make this service easier? So just because you can doesn't mean you should. So that's a comment that's always saved me.
Yeah, that's the thing is like some of the stuff is pre-built and it makes it a lot easier to work with, which is great. I was kind of another point that I was thinking is Rex was talking there about package down, and I was kind of looking through the vignette for their like how to update a release site, and it's basically what Ryan was saying. It's setting up a YAML format in like the GitHub folder and then the workflows folder. So I mean, it looks like that's pretty basically what Ryan was talking about, and so setting it up so that it works with GitHub Actions basically to deploy your site every time you set it up. And so it looks like this vignette's pretty gives a good step-by-step of like what you need to do it. Cool. What other questions, comments do people have? Has anybody ever built a package down site before? Yeah.
No. What I would say to the team and anybody in the future watching the video is that I'm not smart enough to create this on my own, or at least I need a little bit more time to really focus and delve into the intricacies of what we're doing to create the YAML file and the different variable calls that we have access to, but maybe not necessarily use to create the YAML file. There's so many different mechanisms here, and I'll close with this, Colin, and we'll let us finish up. As of, we'll call it March of this year, I was granted access to an AWS Kubernetes cluster. Now think of just Docker on steroids. Right now, instead of one, I'm dealing with 3. And you use some Helm. Helm is like a automated tool that brings all of your resources together to create the cluster, et cetera. It's not important. Just know that I had access to it. But I was on my own. There wasn't anybody helping. So I was literally stumbling through the process on my own. And there were many times I would spend hours looking at it thinking, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And I'd make a quick phone call and like, oh yeah, that's something you got to do over here, and just put that reference in, and magically it worked. And I'm like, well, that's not documented anywhere. Docker and a lot of the clustering services, Mesos and Kubernetes, it's still fairly new. I mean, if you look at IT in general, right, a couple of years is like, light years of history in IT world, but releasing in 2013 and then kind of still revolutionizing the world, it's still fairly new, and the documentation is still forthcoming. So if you don't succeed the first time, please don't feel worried of reaching out to another and asking some questions and guidance, because you're probably not the first person that ran into that error. It just may not be documented due to its recent development. Anyway.
Nothing hurts more when you get a service set up with a Docker container, and then you like make a small little change somewhere, and you just like sink weeks into figuring out what went wrong. So yeah, and then you're like digging through the documentation, and none of it's like specific to your specific problem. So you're just like trying everything, and like if you're building an environment that's like has like a lot of dependencies on it, it takes so long. So, but I see the value in these tools, but kind of saying what you were saying, Ryan, is like this stuff is like new. Like this isn't new just to data science. This is new to like IT and software development.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Well, I'm thinking like the test cases, right? So Rex, you had discussed some details, or you had expanded quite a bit on the test cases. If you could write those test cases, right, and put that in a workflow so that when you commit a change, or anybody on your team commits a change, it would automatically roll through those test cases and provide you feedback, right? Just you're not going to update version control until you correct this error, or a PR request. Somebody puts in a PR request and it goes through its own, kind of cycling of checks and balances, and it will either, prompt you and say, hey, yeah, go ahead and sign off. It's definitely a time saver if set up correctly. So that was my one thought in a package development form of doing this. And I do want to apologize to the team that I did not use GitHub Actions, and that's just for me in the whole Microsoft world. If it weren't for the community, I probably wouldn't use GitHub, but that's just me. That's my own world of opinion. So
yeah, but I think these concepts, like you said, they translate over. So they just translate over. So most of these services are going to use the same kind of concepts. It's just going to look a little bit differently. So cool. Well, we could hang out and talk a little bit more, but I just want to talk about next week. Rex, I wanted to confirm if you're still cool with next week. If you could do 20 and 22 to wrap us up. I was looking at chapter 20 the other day. That's mostly like, I'm thinking that's mostly like a checklist of stuff, I think. So, I mean, if you want to cover like the most important things, and again, if you can't do it, just let me know. I'll definitely take it on. But I was looking at 20 and I was like, that's mostly like a checklist of stuff. And I don't necessarily know if this is all important, but are you still cool with covering?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Okay, sweet.
Easy.
Excellent. And then so I think looking at like where the book is at and where the group is at, I think next week is the last week, because we're pretty much covered most of the material, and yeah, we're really close to having the book completed. And so I think this would be a good kind of ending point of doing the final R command check for your package and then releasing it to CRAN. So I think this is going to be exciting to kind of cover this topic and have a send off for the book club. So cool. That's all I have right now. So I really appreciate Ryan taking the time to put together some content for us on CI/CD pipelines and websites. And so if people want to hang out, chat about some other stuff, other questions for Ryan, go ahead. If not, have a good rest of your night. So
Yeah, head off. See you guys.
see you,
Thanks,
Rex.
Yeah. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks.